Straight Shooter with Stephen A.
Welcome to the latest edition of Straight Shooter with yours truly, Stephen A. Smith, coming at you over the airwaves of Sirius XM, POTUS Radio, Channel 124. The call-in number, as always, is 866-967-6887. That's 866-96-POTUS. You heard the audience clapping in the background. Now, that's foreign territory for me. In doing this show since September 17th, I've never done the show in front of a live studio audience, but I have a studio audience in front of me. I'm honored to have everybody here. Thank y'all so much for being a part of today's show. In approximately 20 minutes or so, the senator from the great state of Texas, the one and only Senator Ted Cruz, will be in attendance right here in studio with yours truly. We got obviously a lot to talk about. There's a shutdown that came to an end after 43 days of absolute senselessness on the part of both parties, as far as I'm concerned, because the American people suffered, not them, which is a problem that we can get into at a later date, how federal workers weren't being paid, but elected officials were being paid. How folks was having a health care compromise, but these folks still receiving health care. Don't get me started with this stuff, okay? So we're glad that that's over as Thanksgiving approaches, as Christmas approaches, and we don't have to worry about that. A continual resolution will ultimately be revisited come January 31st, and we'll go on from there. There's also the issue of the Epstein files, and that's where I'm going to start today because it's necessary. Okay, and I'll be taking questions from the studio audience. I'll be taking calls before the show is over. There's a lot of stuff to get into, but due to the fact that I'm not some political aficionado that's been spending my life covering politics, I come from a layman's perspective. I kind of bring it home and exercise common sense as I tackle a lot of these issues as a conscientious observer, as a voter, etc. There's certain things that make sense, and then there are certain things that simply do not. So President Donald Trump had religiously stated, it's much ado about nothing. You understand, had given indications he didn't want the Epstein files open. This is after he had campaigned on opening the files. This is after he had campaigned opening the files. And after he had campaigned on opening the JFK assassination files and everything else. Suddenly, it's much ado about nothing, and he didn't want to touch it. A lot of people found that very, very suspicious. It made it a very, very uncomfortable position for the president to be in. You know it's bad when MAGA turned against you. When MAGA is on the same side as the progressive left and they're aligning with one another to come after you, to open those files. You know that's big. You know that's a big deal, okay? We've heard Marjorie Taylor Greene and some of the things that she called Donald Trump out about. We've seen Senator Massey out of Kentucky and some of the things he called Donald Trump out about. We've seen so many other people on the left calling Donald Trump out. And I sat back and I said to myself, something's fishy. Something ain't right. And I'm not talking about Donald Trump. I'm talking about the rest of them. Because eventually he just stopped talking about it. There was always another issue that came up. If he wasn't attacking reporters from ABC or The View, he was attacking somebody from CBS. He was attacking somebody from late night. He was attacking headline after headline after headline. Anything to distract us from the Epstein files, which was growing in terms of its suspicion and its intrigue. And then he did something that I didn't see coming. He said, to hell with it, open the files. I'll sign to open the files. No problem. And the first words that came to my mind was, uh-oh. Because Donald Trump is not going to do that if it's going to be something that significantly hurts Donald Trump. He's going to do it if, dare I say, he's got something on other people. Because that is who we know him to be, ladies and gentlemen. That's what it is. There's no way around this. And sure enough, one of the first names that came out was Larry Summers, who worked as the Treasury Secretary under the Clinton administration, who worked on economic policies for Barack Obama, who was religiously associated with the left, who was still teaching at Harvard, and then ultimately had to step back and step away from public settings and things of that nature, scale back his role within the last 24 hours because he was one of the names that appeared in the Epstein files. He was somebody that knew Epstein. He was somebody that kept in constant contact with Epstein. He was somebody that Epstein had influenced and coaxed Epstein into donating millions upon millions of dollars to Harvard University. I mean, in excess of $9 million. Okay? This is the kind of stuff that was happening. And you found yourself saying, oh, damn. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you, that's exactly what you should be thinking. It should be, oh, damn. Because that's just the first shoe to drop. Why is Larry Summers bothered? Why does he have to step away? Why has his reputation been impugned to some degree? It's very, very simple when you think about it. The reason that it happened was because there were emails. And those emails revealed that this man that had been married for decades was asking Jeffrey Epstein for dating advice. And we don't know all the details about it, but this man that had been married for decades needs dating advice. Obviously, it wasn't to date his wife. And not only was he communicating with Jeffrey Epstein prior to Jeffrey Epstein being arrested and indicted back in 2007, 2008, whenever it was, this was a year before Epstein had committed suicide, reportedly. In like 2018. And he's in there asking for advice on how to pick up this woman. After the man had been associated with sexual assault and sexual offenses of minors, you were still communicating with him. Is that somebody that you asked for dating advice from? He did. He did. And then as you look and you scour the internet and you see old footages, we've seen old footages of Michelle Obama. We've seen old footages of Barack Obama. We've seen old footages of Bill Clinton. Ladies and gentlemen, do you really, really think that Donald Trump is going to sign off on releasing the Epstein files and not have a boatload of stuff that he's going to throw in the Democrats' direction? At some point in time, we got to fall back to what one of my boys, Jeff Brown in LA, said. He said, Trump has become a verb. The name Trump has become a verb. He's trumping the Democrats at every turn, playing them like a fiddle. Now, I don't know whether this is true or not, but I know there are people that believe that. And the reason why you got to have attach substance to it because what else would make sense? You got a 2026 midterm election coming up. You think Donald Trump's going to do something to harm himself and damage or compromise his legacy with what he's trying to get done, whatever that may be? You think he's going to do that? He's not going to do that. If he does it, it's going to be, hey, it's because of them. He got questioned by the media just 24 hours ago while he had the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia in attendance with him. Supposedly them getting a pledge of $1 trillion dedicated to U.S. businesses. The pledges, I don't vibe with that, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. I don't give a damn about a pledge. Where's the dollars? You can promise me anything. When you deliver the money, let me know. I'm not getting caught up in the pledges, but that's beside the point right now. With the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia in attendance, with the reporters getting on his nerves because they're asking what Donald Trump would say are rude and nasty questions. I've never seen a question so rude, never seen a question so nasty. That's how he rolls. Getting annoyed at it, he said, but I'll answer the question. And then proceeded to bring up Clinton, proceeded to bring up Larry Summers, and proceeded to hint at other Democrats. Meanwhile, Pam Bondi for the DOJ and others are telling you that once he signs legislation basically releasing the Epstein files, that they're going to get it to the public in 30 days. What the hell you need 30 days for? You've had the files for months. We know what that's about. You're going to redact stuff that could be potentially incriminating to Republicans, to yourself, or various others to help your cause. When you're in power, this is the kind of leverage, this is the kind of cachet that you're able to exercise. Plain and simple. We all know that. But what that does mean is the Democrats, once again, one could easily argue, are at his mercy. because he allowed them to go out and bloviate, sticking out their chest, open the Epstein file, open the Epstein file, open the Epstein file. And that's what this has come down to. Now, I know I made news and everybody was saying I didn't know what I was talking about when I was saying, why didn't the Democrats open the Epstein file? I understood. And I didn't mean to imply that Joe Biden could just snap his fingers and open it. You got to get jurisdiction from the courts to do that. I got that part. I totally get it. What I was saying was whatever maneuvers you needed to exhaust to get the files open, just like this president and this administration could pull off stuff like that, so could have y'all over the previous 4 years when a different administration was in office. That's all I was saying. Whatever legal maneuvering you had to exercise in order to pull off getting those files open, don't tell me that you could not have done it. I'm just speaking about that as a layman. Where there's a will, there's a way. And you can't tell me that if you wanted those Epstein files opened over the previous 4 years, that you couldn't have found a way to get those files open. I'm not saying that there weren't laws put in place that prohibited you from doing so. I'm trying to say there's a workaround. Why? Because this is America. There's always a damn workaround. That's all I meant. Everybody want to get into the minutia. Oh, he said this, he said that. You're wrong. You're missing. Oh, stop it. Stop being children. You know exactly what I'm saying. When there's a will, there's a way. And if you can find it, you will. As a president, as a legislator. Period. So somewhere along the way, it appears, particularly as we learn more and more and more, that there was an incentive for various elected officials not to prioritize getting these files opened. Am I making it up now? Is it not making sense? This is what we have to pay attention to. And so as a result, now the most important, pertinent question needs to be asked. What kind of effect, if any at all, do you think this is going to have with the 2026 midterms coming up? With Trump and his cachet and what he's plotting to do, whatever that may be, and whatever level of influence he's willing to wield. See, for me, the way that I look at it is very, very simple. I like checks and balances. As this studio audience is sitting right here looking at me, understand who I am. I am a person, I am an American citizen, I am a voter, I am a conscientious observer who does not want one party in complete power. If the Republicans got the White House, I want the Democrats to have the House or the Senate. If a Democrat has the White House, I want the Republicans to have the House or the Senate. I want both sides to be compelled to have to communicate with one another in an effort to get things done. Why is it so important to me that bipartisanship enters the fray and somehow, some way, we as American citizens are witnessing our elected officials go across the aisle, being forced and compelled to work with one another in order to get things done? Why is that? I would say to you, it's the best way to avoid chaos. Now, stay with me where I'm at as I'm sitting there talking to a national audience over the airwaves of SiriusXM, POTUS Radio, Channel 124, as I'm talking to a live studio audience right here in front of me. Understand where I'm coming from. I want y'all to think about this. As I'm sitting and looking y'all eye to eye right in your faces right now, I want you to think about something very, very important. Think about the angst that you feel. Think about the discomfort that just sifts through your veins when we think about our politics. And then ask yourself, before pausing for 1 second, what role did the friction between both sides play in it? If you're a liberal or you're a conservative, and both sides are telling you if we don't get our way, all hell and fury is going to kick in. It's going to be nothing but chaos. Armageddon is going to arrive. The world as we know it, America, is going to fall apart and crumble before our very eyes if we don't get our way. And one side is telling you that. How's the side that lost going to feel? You're going to be in panic mode because the politicians that are legislating our lives involving healthcare, involving immigration, involving the economy, involving safety in the streets, involving affordability, involving education, etc. They're telling you if you don't get your way, it's all coming to an end. How could we possibly be comfortable? We can't be comfortable. We're worried as hell because you've convinced us that it's win or else, because you're not working with one another. But when you're working with one another on both sides of the aisle to reach some kind of accord, you get some, they get some. You don't get some things, they don't get some things. You might lament certain things along the way, but in the end, you're saying we're going to be okay because they're working together. And then on top of it all, representatives got 2 years. And then they can be in again or they could be out. Senators got 6 years. Then they could be in again or they could be out. The president's got 4 years. Then he or she could be in or he could be out. And there's something along the way that tells us no matter what we're looking at, it's going to be all right. What has happened is they haven't done that. They've played us like pawns. And because that has happened, it's created the level of vitriol and cynicism and, dare I say, hatred from one side or the other that has sifted into the streets of America, that has made our lives uncomfortable. And that's why I'm here, to talk to as many people as I can about these issues. And who better to talk to in terms of one of those people than the 3-term senator from the great state of Texas. His name is Ted Cruz. I am looking forward to this conversation. He's coming up next, right here on Straight Shooter with Stephen A. Don't go away. We'll be right back. "36 minutes past hour number 1 back here on Straight Shooter with yours truly, Stephen A. Smith, coming at you as I love to do every Wednesday night from 6 to 8 p.m. over the airways of Sirius XM, POTUS Radio, channel 124. It's my honor and privilege to have this man. I've been waiting to interview him for a long, long time. He is the senator from the great state of Texas, the one and only Ted Cruz. How are you, sir? Nice to finally meet you. How's everything?
Stephen, I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for having me.
Man, thank you for being here. First things first, the shutdown is over.
Yeah.
Thank the good Lord.
Amen.
What took it so long?
Look, the Democrats, I think, wanted a shutdown. Mm-hmm. You know, you look at, we had 15 votes, 15 votes that Republicans voted to open the government, and 15 votes that Democrats voted to keep it shut. And I think the reason for it at the end of the day was a political problem that Chuck Schumer had. So you go back to March. So, look, the fundamental problem is to pass any funding for the government takes 60 votes in the Senate. That's the filibuster rule. That's the way the Senate's operated forever. There are only 53 Republicans. That means to open the government, to fund the government, you've got to get at least 7 Democrats. You actually have to get 8 because Rand Paul always votes no. So you got to get 8. Back in March, the last government funding expired, and the Democrats worked with Republicans to keep the government open. And what happened is the left wing of the Democrat Party got furious. I mean, Schumer almost lost his job. And so I think this time Schumer felt the need. He had to show that he really, really, really hates Donald Trump. And so the Democrats voted no on funding, and we did it over and over and over again. Ultimately, after 43 days, 8 Democrats broke and voted with us to reopen the government. And it was, look, I think it's a political dynamic where there is a real battle in the Democrat Party. I don't know that Schumer survives, because even after he voted 15 times not to fund the government, even after he voted no the last time when the government opened up, you still had a bunch of voices in the Democrat Party saying fire Chuck Schumer. And so I think it was basically just political anger that shut the government down. But a lot of Americans were hurt by the consequences.
Isn't this just kicking the can down the road, though? Because it's only for the next couple of months to get through the holidays, Thanksgiving and Christmas. And then after that, we're revisiting this all over again at the end of January, right? Yeah,
January 30th, we could do the whole thing all over again. And again, we got to get 60. So if the Democrats all vote no again, it'll shut down on January 30th.
You wouldn't have to if you got rid of the filibuster, which is what the president is proposing you guys do. Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, that's not going to happen. The votes are not there on the Republican side.
Why not, though? Why aren't the votes there?
Because if you look at the last Congress, so when Joe Biden was in the White House and you had a Democrat Senate and a Democrat House, Schumer tried to end the filibuster. And he would have. Every Democrat but two voted to end the filibuster. The two who voted against it were Joe Manchin from West Virginia and Kyrsten Sinema from Arizona. Now, by the way, both of them were chased out of the Democrat Party. So they're not there anymore. If the Democrats had ended the filibuster and Kamala had won in November, I'll tell you what January of this year would have looked like. Schumer would have ended the filibuster, which means he could pass any legislation he wants with just 50 votes. The first bill he would have passed is a bill that's called S1, and it's the first bill Schumer introduces every Congress. And it is a federal takeover of election law nationwide. So it strikes down election integrity laws all over the country. It strikes down photo ID for voting over the country. It's designed, frankly, to make sure Democrats win elections across the country. The second thing they would have done is added two new states to the union. They would have added D.C. and they would have added Puerto Rico. And the reason they would do that is they believe that would elect 4 new Democrat senators. The third thing they would have done is they would have granted immediate voting rights to every illegal alien in the country and citizenship. If that had happened, let's take my home state of Texas. If illegal aliens voted, Texas would turn blue instantaneously. There are 29 statewide elected officials in Texas. All of them are Republican right now. The next election, all 29 would flip Democrat, and Texas would literally become California. We would end up with the same policies in Texas they have in California. And the fourth thing they would have done is pack the U.S. Supreme Court. Right now, there are 9 justices. They wanted to add 4 new left-wing justices, take it to 13. Look, my view, I'm an optimist by nature.
Are you?
I am deeply an optimist. I
okay.
believe in America. I believe in brighter days ahead.
I was just joking about it because you don't sound optimistic when you talk about the Democrats. That's all I meant by that. I'm not talking about America. I'm just talking about Democrats.
As optimistic as I am in that scenario, I don't know how you turn that around. There's no way that's designed to lock in permanent Democrat power. And ultimately, the filibuster stopped that. And so I think a lot of Republicans say, look, that's the only thing that stopped us from going over a cliff. So most Republicans think if the Democrats take over, they'll end the filibuster. But from our end, we're not going to participate in the demise of the institution.
Well, what you just finished describing, educate, because you know more than the rest of us, but educate us about what role the whole redistricting issue in Texas played in terms of what you just articulated. Because obviously when everybody looked at the redistricting, they were thinking about more seats. That's what Donald Trump came out of his mouth and said there would be more Republican seats in the House and what have you. And so because they were looking at it from that standpoint, people were saying that essentially that the GOP was trying to do exactly what you just described the Democrats were trying to do. How do you argue against that?
So, look, there's no doubt that Texas redistricting was designed to increase Republican representation. If you look at Texas under the current map, there are 38 congressional seats in Texas. About 56% of Texans vote Republican right now in the last election, 2024. And about 65% of the congressional seats are Republican. So a little bit more than the percentage of the state, but 56 to 65 is pretty close. You know where California is right now?
Where?
83% of the congressional seats in California are Democrat. And one pattern you see across the country, Democrat states are overwhelmingly gerrymandered much more than Republicans are. So what Texas did is it went from 65% Republican to the new map they drew was 79% Republican. So it did increase it. It would have added 5 new Republican seats. California responded by going from 83%.
What was it, 89 or 90?
92.
92.
And so it would, and you look at other states like Massachusetts, there are 9 congressional seats. You know how many are Democrat?
How many?
All of them. 100%. That's true of New Mexico. That's true of Maryland. They drew their maps. Actually, Maryland has 1 Republican, but they drew their maps. You look at Democrat states that are overwhelmingly skewed, like, Massachusetts, 35% of the voters vote Republican. They get 0 members of the House. Look, my view on it, there's a natural back and forth and give and take. And by the way, there can be a check on, gerrymandering. Sometimes you draw districts to try to win more seats. If your party has a bad election, you can end up losing those seats because you lessen your margins. But in Texas, the majority of the voters are Republicans. They support conservative policies. And I think it is in Texans' interest to have a Republican House of Representatives. And that's what the legislature
Well,
did.
some people will look at it and they'd say, okay, you're playing the same game you're accusing the Democrats of playing. And that's not good because two wrongs don't make a right, Senator Ted Cruz. What do you say to that?
I say both sides do it, and they've done it from the beginning of all time. And look, 20 plus years ago, I was the Solicitor General of Texas, which is the chief lawyer for the state in front of the U.S. Supreme Court.
That's right.
And one of the very first things I walked into in 2003 when I was appointed.
And you clerked under William Rehnquist.
I did, who was an incredible friend and boss and mentor. Mm-hmm. But I showed up as SG. I was 32 years old, and Texas 22 years ago did redistricting then. Mm-hmm. And so I find myself still then as a very young lawyer in the middle of litigation on redistricting. So I spent a lot of time and ended up helping try the case in court, and then it went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and I argued it and won 5-4. Mm-hmm. And the central question there that the Democrats were challenging the redistricting is they said it was too political. It was done to elect more Republicans. And my defense, which the Supreme Court agreed with, is I said, look, the Constitution leaves redistricting questions to elected state legislatures. Politicians are going to be political. And that's not new. That was true from the very beginning of time, that they knew politicians would be, the word gerrymander comes from Elbridge Gerry, who was one of the founding fathers of our country. And Elbridge Gerry had a district that looked like a salamander. So gerrymander is his name, Jerry, plus salamander.
Okay.
And what the Supreme Court concluded is listen, politicians are going to be political on both sides. That's how the democratic process works. But it's better to have districting lines drawn by elected representatives where if the voters are ticked off, they can throw the bums out, than it is the other alternative is to have, say, unelected judges drawing lines. And the Supreme Court said that's not what the Constitution says.
Well, the courts just ruled, they just basically ruled against the state of Texas. And Governor Abbott said, you know what, we're going to appeal this immediately because they didn't vibe with what Texas tried to do in this particular situation. Were you surprised at all about that decision, or did you expect it?
I was a little bit surprised. I will say I think the decision will be reversed. So the state of Texas is going to seek a stay of the U.S. Supreme Court. My prediction is the Supreme Court will stay the decision. We'll say this is not going into effect. The new map, you got congressional candidates who are out there campaigning. They filed. They're raising money. We're less than a year away from the election. So I think the Supreme Court will end up leaving the new map into effect. But I think we'll learn that soon. My guess is in the next couple of weeks.
I got a lot of stuff that I want to get into with you today. And by the way, before you leave today, we're gonna get into I'm gonna mention something about the NCAA with you because I know a lot of stuff that you're doing, and I'm not going to forget. I'm a sports guy. I can't wait to talk to you about that. But I gotta ask you.
But by the way, you still play ball?
Oh hell no. I mean, my knees won't allow it, Senator. My knees won't allow it. It's over. It's over. You just hit a wall one day and you just recognize, I'm just not what I used to be.
Look, I'll tell you, if you ever feel up to it, I play twice a week.
Really?
Yeah. Now, look, I was
Am I getting challenged to a game of basketball by a senator? Is that what's happening right now?
I'm just saying.
It's something I'll entertain if my knees stop acting up. Absolutely so.
We only play half court, though,
there we go.
It's a little bit easier on the knees.
I got you. I want to go from a macro perspective into this party, the state of affairs in this country. Zohran Mamdani is the mayor-elect of New York City. We know he's a renowned socialist, unapologetically so. We saw what happened, even though Spanberger in Virginia, Sherrill in New Jersey, they were more moderate than he was. Mm-hmm. We've seen this movement, and one of the things that you just alluded to was the progressive influence on the Democratic Party. As a member of the GOP party right now, how concerned are you about this? How concerned do you believe your party is about this, and why?
Look, I am worried about it. When I was first elected to the Senate, it was 13 years ago. And when I got there, there were moderate Democrats. There were people who you could work across the aisle, you could reach common ground. There are a lot fewer of them. I mentioned, Manchin and Sinema, who were the two most prominent moderates in the last Congress. They both got chased out of the Democrat Party. Mm-hmm. And I saw it happen when it really happened was when Trump was elected in 2016. And he basically, I think, broke the brains of the Democrats. They just hate him. Mm-hmm. And look, I understand Trump Trump also enjoys sticking his thumb in their eye. I mean, he takes some, he revels in it, but it drives them crazy. And listen, I work very closely with President Trump. I understand people who could disagree with him, and you can have a reasonable debate on all sorts of topics. But the effect of Trump is basically the moderates were chased out of the Democrat Party. I think that's really unfortunate. I think the country would be better with two functioning parties that are not extreme. And I hope that changes over time.
What about those who would ask, you talk about the Democrats and how they just hate them. What about those who would ask, why do you like him? We saw how he treated you when you were competing against him in 2015 for the presidency. Oh, yeah. We saw how he talked about your family, talked about your wife, talked about your dad, he said a lot of things that most people wouldn't forgive. You, as hardcore as they come, fair-minded, no doubt, but hardcore as they come, the word forgiving nature, it's not the thing that gets associated with Ted Cruz. Is that fair to say? I mean, why do you seem so nice and finding yourself to like him a little bit?
Listen, there's no doubt in the 2016 cycle, he and I beat the living daylights out of him. And I beat the living daylights out of him, and he beat the living daylights out of me. And it was rough. And, politics, it ain't beanbag. Mm-hmm. And listen, I won 12 states. I came within inches of winning the nomination, but he beat me. And when he got elected in November 2016, I had a choice to make, and I thought about it, which is I could have had hurt feelings, and he said some rough things about me, although to be fair, I said some rough things about him too. Okay. But I got a job to do, and my job is to represent 31 million Texans. And so if I was going to get my feelings hurt and say I'm going to take my ball and go home, I could do that. But I better be prepared to resign from the Senate and say I can't do my job, because I didn't think I could do my job. We had an opportunity, I thought, in 2016, and we have an opportunity now to do a lot of good. And so actually what I did, I got on a plane right after he got elected in 16, and I flew to New York, and I spent 4.5 hours in Trump Tower. And I sat with him and I said, look, we've been given an historic opportunity. Republicans have been given the White House and both houses of Congress. That's rare. That doesn't happen very often. Mm-hmm. And I said, we can't blow this chance. And I told him then, I want to roll up my sleeves and get to work so we deliver on our promises. And I've been his strongest ally in the Senate since then, and I think we've gotten a lot accomplished. I'm proud of the record of what's gotten accomplished. And you've spent time with him.
I've known Trump. I haven't spent time with him at all since he came down those escalators. Mm-hmm. Okay, but prior to that, that's why I don't vibe with all the people that just talk the things, the malicious things that they say about him on a personal level. I think it would be hypocritical, because all of us in the world of sports, we were associated with him. We used to go to his events all the time. We talked with him all the time. None of us ever had a problem with him. And I'm one of those people that refuses to all of a sudden, now that he's the president, even though I don't like some of the things he does, Senator, I don't like some of the things he does,
I get it.
I'm not going to turn around and act like I didn't have that relationship with him prior to that. I'm not going to do that.
Well, listen, he is one of a kind. They broke the mold with Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. There's never been anyone like him. I don't think there'll be anyone like him after that. Mm-hmm. What I appreciate about him is he's got courage. He's got guts in a way that there are not many people in politics that have. And that has led to, you look at some of the successes. Let's take, for example, the southern border. Obviously, I represent Texas. Yes. During the last 4 years under Biden, we saw 12 million people come into this country illegally. It was the worst illegal immigration we'd ever seen. That was a big, big factor in 2024. It was a big factor in Texas. Trump came in, and illegal border crossings have dropped more than 99%. I mean, that is a big deal, and that has resulted in improving the lives of a whole lot of people. And so I work with him because we're getting a lot of good stuff done, but he's also, he can be a lot of fun. He's got a great sense of humor. Part of the reason people watch his rallies is when he's standing up there, you don't know what he's going to say. He could say, there are times where he says things, you just shake your head and say, I can't believe those words.
Most of the time it comes across like he don't know what he was going to say. Well, if we're being honest. Yeah, look, I'm not comparing it to Biden, but sometimes he's rambling. I'm like, my God, get to your point.
He can have some riffs that are just, it's kind of free association, what pops in his head, mm-hmm. but he's an entertainer. Mm-hmm. And look, you're an entertainer. That's part of, if you want people to turn on the TV and listen to what you're saying, You don't want to be boring. You want to say something interesting. And he, people watch in part because they don't know what he's going to say, and that makes it interesting.
But Ted Cruz, you're an Hispanic, okay? And you brought up the southern border. No doubt, I'm unapologetic. The borders needed to be closed.
Yeah.
Because Biden, look, now had Biden imitated Obama, who deported more people than Trump, by the way, than Trump did in his first term, had you mimicked the policies of a president you once served under, if Biden had done that, that would be different. But to open the borders, to claim that, we have no border issue whatsoever, when it was clear as day that simply was false, it was not true. There's no doubt that I believe that Trump was absolutely right in saying the borders needed to be closed.
Right.
But I ask you this question, as an Hispanic, as a United States Senator, when you see the actions, the optics of ICE in the streets of America with Hispanics and others running away from them. When you see how many people say they're American citizens and they've been dragged out of their cars, they've been thrown to the ground, stuff like that, the visual, the optics, how does that make you feel? And how do you explain to Hispanics in this country, who are now the dominant minority in terms of numbers, how do you explain to them that that's okay?
Well, listen, I think Hispanics, you can want to see a secure border. You can want to see your community safe. I'll tell you, in 2024, in the election, Texas is a majority-minority state. We will, by the 2030s, will be majority Hispanic. And in this last elections, I won Hispanics in Texas by 6 points statewide, and Trump won Hispanics in Texas. And a big part of the reason, you go down to the Rio Grande Valley, which is South Texas, right along the border with Mexico. The valley has been blue, it's been Democrat for 100 years. This last election, the valley flipped red. I won the valley and Trump won the valley. And the reason is, when your home is invaded by 12 million people, people in the valley they see people being released. And you mentioned Obama. Look, I've joked, but it's true. I said Biden did something I used to think was impossible. He made me miss Barack Obama. Because, look, on immigration, Obama, by and large, followed the law. He deported millions of people. Remember, the left called him the deporter-in-chief.
Yeah, over 4 million.
Yeah. What Biden did, there's never been a president who's done this, which is he just defied the federal law, and when people were apprehended, they let them go. And in fact, apprehended wasn't even the right term. So I spent a lot of time on the border. I'd go out with Border Patrol on midnight patrol, and you'd see groups coming across. They would go look for the Border Patrol, and they'd turn themselves in because they knew Border Patrol would take custody of them, and they'd ask, where do you want to go? And they'd say, I want to go to New York, I want to go to Philadelphia, I want to go to Dallas. And the Biden administration would put them on a plane or put them on a bus and send them to every city in the country. And that, look, Hispanics in Texas saw the consequences of that. They saw the crime. They saw when 12 million people flood into the country, they saw the consequences. So if you look at who ICE is targeting violent criminals, they're targeting murderers, they're targeting rapists, child molesters, and gangbangers. And I got to say, in Texas, and I think in a lot of communities, I don't know a lot of communities that say, our families would be better off if we had more violent criminals here. And so I think enforcing the law is entirely consistent with also welcoming legal immigrants. My dad came as an immigrant from Cuba. Mm-hmm. And when my dad came to America, he had nothing. He was 18, he couldn't speak English, and his first job was washing dishes, making 50 cents an hour. But he came legally. That's the right way to come. And I think in Texas, at least, and in a lot of parts of the country, Hispanic voters recognize that there's a right way to come, and they want their families safe and secure just like everyone else.
Oh, we got more to talk about. Senator Ted Cruz in the house, Straight Shooter with Stephen A. Smith right here over Sirius XM POTUS Radio Channel 124. A lot of stuff to get into, and I'm going to get to the NCAA. That's just personal for me, y'all. It's a sports question, but damn it, you'll understand why I got to ask this man right here next to me that very question about the NCAA. A lot more to come up with. Stephen A. Smith, Senator Ted Cruz in the house. Back with more in a minute. Top of the 7 o'clock hour, back here, Straight Shooter with Stephen A. Smith. The one and only Senator Ted Cruz out of the great state of Texas is right here in studio with me with this live audience. Sir, before I get back to politics, I'm a sports guy.
Yeah.
And I hope I'm able to pull it off at some point. You and on the left, Senator Cory Booker out of New Jersey have both put forth legislation to really address the situation with NCAA sports, the student athletes. Tell my audience what that's about right now with you.
Look, I think college sports is a mess right now. If you look at NIL and the transfer portal, and it's the Wild West. And I worry, I think Congress needs to act, and I think most members of the Senate agree with that. That if we don't act, I think we're going to see a lot of schools ending their athletic programs. I think we're going to see smaller schools ending their athletic programs. I think we're going to see track and field and Olympic sports eliminated at a lot of schools. I think we need to step in and protect the rights. Look, I think NIL is a good thing. I think athletes deserve to enjoy the fruits of their labor. They've developed great skills. So I think that's much more fair. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I want a system, as you know, college sports has been an avenue for millions of young men and women to get an education. People, the vast majority, 1% of college athletes are going to play pro ball. Most are not going to play in the NFL, not going to play in the NBA. But young men and women, many of whom would never get a chance at an education, get to go through an athletic scholarship. And so I think we need to act to preserve that opportunity. And to get it done, you and I started by talking about the shutdown. Yeah. The same filibuster rule works. The only way we're going to pass NIL legislation is if we get 60 votes. So I've been spending the last couple of years working real hard trying to get bipartisan agreement. We're not there yet. The person I'm working most closely with is Chris Coons from Delaware.
Yes, who I know well.
And Chris is a smart guy. He and I have been on the Judiciary Committee.
He's helped me immensely with HBCUs, absolutely.
Yep. Well, and the HBCUs feel a real urgency on this, that if we don't fix NIL, the HBCUs are worried they're going to lose their sports programs. And so my hope is we'll come together in a way that brings some sense of order and semblance and protects college sports.
Two things. Number one, count me in anything that you need from me.
Fantastic.
I'm happy to help in any way that I possibly can, and I am dying at some point in time to have you and Senator Cory Booker on together to talk about this lone issue involving the NCAA and student athletes, because you two together talking about the issues from both sides of the aisle, I think it's important for a national audience to hear. So thank you so much for that.
Well, it might surprise you, but Booker and I are friends. We get along quite well. We've gone out to dinner. People freak out in D.C. They see Cory Booker and me sitting at a dinner table, and they're like, what, this is a sign of Armageddon. But Cory he's a smart guy. We don't agree on a lot of policy issues, but he's a smart guy. He's got a great sense of humor.
Yeah. He's been on the show.
Although I will tell you, I'm going to talk a little bit of smack on Cory. I mentioned I play hoops.
Yes.
So
he has football.
So a bunch of senators have played with me, but two senators, Booker and Marco Rubio, both gave me the same lame-ass excuse.
They ran from you?
They both said, Ted, if you're over 40 and you're playing hoops, you're going to tear your Achilles. And I said, look, you can either be dead or you can act like you're dead. And both of them were college football players. I mean, Booker was a serious college football player.
Yeah.
So I haven't been able to get either one of them, so I keep talking smack trying to get one of them to...
Well, I mean, it's not the biggest thing, Senator, to brag about how you challenged Marco Rubio to a basketball game. I mean, I love the guy. I think that he's a threat to be the next president of the United States. He's got a chance as Secretary of State, National Security. Right? I mean, we know what Marco Rubio brings to the table and what he was as a senator. But I mean, he's about 5'5", 5'6". I mean, something like that.
He's actually probably 5'9", but he was a running back. I mean,
that's
he did
true.
play college football.
We say basketball, not football.
I understand.
Okay, I'm just saying.
All right, I want to ask you as a sports guy,
Yes,
what do you think are the chances my Rockets win it all? Because I'm bullish on them.
I think they got a chance. I think Oklahoma City is the best team in basketball right now. You'd have to go through them. They've got size, they've got athleticism, they've got shooting, they've got perimeter shooting. They're an elite defensive team, and they have the best player, one of the best players in the world in SGA. He's absolutely fantastic. But you guys are exceptionally well coached by Ime Udoka. Kevin Durant is a superstar and the number one option, and you can start 4 dudes 6'11" and above, which is what it may take to beat Oklahoma City.
Did you watch the last game against Orlando?
I didn't see the last game.
Okay, so it was a game we trailed the whole game. We were not playing all that well, and then we fought back. And look, we got a bunch of young talent, but we needed a closer. We needed someone in the last 2 minutes of the fourth quarter you can give the ball to and can go score.
KD.
And KD is one of the greatest to ever live.
He's that dude.
And you look at it, went to overtime, and we won the game, and we literally were losing the whole game. It made me feel very happy because that's the piece we were missing.
That's right.
Lots of talent, but someone who can close
Last
it.
point about this before I get to politics.
Yeah.
I feel much more bullish about y'all had Fred VanVleet not got injured.
I know. God, that's
Him
painful.
getting injured is what did you in my opinion. But
I mean,
you
we
still
got
got a chance.
Şengün
You still got a chance.
playing point guard
You still got
sometimes.
You still got a
That's
chance.
weird.
You still got a chance.
Yeah.
Let me get back to politics here.
Yeah.
You running for president?
At this
You're
point,
in the
I'm
news.
doing my job. Look,
President Trump said that he supports you.
Well, I'm not sure he said that, but he did say we're good friends
he
and
said
we
you're
work
good friends.
together very closely.
Yes.
And
Says a long way to go.
Listen, what I'm doing right now is doing my job, which is fighting for 31 million Texans. And we're winning some historic victories. So I'll give you an example. We just passed the big reconciliation bill on July 4th. I wrote a lot of that bill, and there are a lot of pieces there that are really important. Let me mention two that I think are the two most important parts of the bill, and I wrote both of them. Okay. One is school choice, and we passed the largest federal school choice provision that has ever passed. It's going to help. It's going to unlock billions of dollars of scholarships for millions of kids to attend a school of their choice, and it's going to transform their futures. That's now in the law. And secondly is what are called the Trump accounts, and I wrote this too. We're starting next July 4th, every child in America is going to have a personal investment account open for them. Every newborn child will have it seeded with $1,000. Parents and family and employers can put $5,000 a year in a tax advantage account. All of that is invested in the S&P 500, which means every child in America is going to get to experience the benefit of compound growth. And we're going to create a whole new generation of capitalists because our kids are going to be owners of the biggest employers in America. Both of those are in the bill that we passed on July 4th. I wrote them both, and those kind of victories are historic. I think, Stephen, 10, 20, 30 years from now, we'll look back and say that changed America in a way that was powerful.
What about the Supreme Court?
Yeah.
People mention you about that because they think listen, you've been called next level brilliant. People view you as somebody that's more than qualified to sit on the highest court in the land. Your name has been broached in that regard. If not the presidency, what about that? So
look, I respect the Supreme Court immensely, and it's humbling to be discussed in that context. That is not the path I want to go. And the first term, Trump had 3 vacancies. He talked to me about all 3. And I told him flat out, no, I don't want the job. And people are surprised. A lot of people say, well, gosh, because much of my career has been arguing cases in front of the Supreme Court. That's what I did for a living before I was in the Senate. The reason I don't want to be a judge is a principled federal judge stays out of political fights and stays out of policy fights. And if I were a judge, that's what I'd do. I don't want to stay out of political fights and policy fights. I want to get right in the middle of fighting for school choice. I want to get right in the middle of trying to fix college athletics. I want to get right in the middle of securing the border. And the right place to do those fights is in the elected offices. And so that's where I am right now. And I jump out of bed every day. My dad was an immigrant with nothing, and now his son gets to represent the state of Texas in the Senate. What an incredible privilege. And so I respect and even revere the Supreme Court, but I have told President Trump unequivocally I don't want it. I would not accept it. But I'm proud of having worked with him to confirm some really good justices.
We're running out of time. I could have pushed back a little bit more with ICE in terms of who. It's one thing, I have no doubt that they're targeting those folks, but also Tom Homan, who I respect and I've interviewed on this show on several occasions. He's very dogged in his approach towards, protecting, closing the borders and making sure that folks don't cross the border illegally. When we talk about criminals and stuff like that, there are times he comes across as not drawing a distinction between actual criminals and those who just cross the border illegally because it's illegal to cross the border. That's his mentality, and that's raised some flags. Although I can bring that up, I'm not going to. That'll be for another time. Here's what I wanted to bring up to you because I'm very uncomfortable. This is not about you. I'm very uncomfortable with things that I've seen from Tucker Carlson.
Yeah.
Some of the verbiage. A recent interview with Nick Fuentes.
Yeah.
some of the things that have been said, and we don't have time to get into the specifics per se, but it was very uncomfortable to listen to some of the stuff they've said about race, some of the stuff that was articulated about the Jewish community or whatever. And you made news because of an interview you had with Tucker Carlson months ago, whenever that was. I want to know, what are your feelings about the state of this country, the climate, particularly when you see the kind of rhetoric that he's been tackling?
Listen, Stephen, you and I are on exactly the same page on this. And look, I look at the question of anti-Semitism. I think 10 years ago in the Democrat Party, you started to see an anti-Semitism rise. And a lot of the Democrat leaders looked the other way. They hoped it would go away. And I think it's all but taken over their party. And Mondami's a good example of just how extreme that can get. It's also happening on the Republican side. And in the last 6 months, I've seen more anti-Semitism on the right than any time in my life. And it is wrong. And from my perspective, I'm going to do everything I can to stop it. I think Tucker is dangerous. I think what he's saying is wrong. And I'm calling him out. And I'm calling him out over and over and over again. When you have goose-stepping Nazis on your program, when you have a professor who says, gosh, I think Winston Churchill is the villain of World War II, when you have another professor who says there's a good argument America should have supported the Nazis in World War II. No, there's not, and that's garbage, and Tucker's gone down a very dark path, and I don't want to wake up in 5 years and see the Republican Party have gone down the path of the Democrats. If we have a country where both parties are viciously anti-Israel and welcoming and even celebrating of anti-Semitism, that is an ugly place. And one of the things, when you go down the road of anti-Semitism, it very quickly leads you to anti-capitalism and anti-Americanism. And Mondami's a good example of that, where he's an Islamist, but he's also a socialist. And you look at Tucker. Tucker's going down that road, too, in a way that I think is very dangerous. So at least on my end, and I'm encouraging other Republicans, stand up and reject this. If you are a bigot, if you are a Klansman, if you are a Nazi, you got no business in the Republican Party, and we don't want you. And I don't think you should be welcomed in either party, because I think our country was built on equal rights for everybody.
You brought up Mondami.
Yeah.
And you threw his name into the equation. I mentioned Tucker Carlson. You just said what you said. And you said you were very, very concerned about the GOP and the Republicans as it pertains to the direction that they're going in. Who are you more concerned about as it pertains to that issue, the Democrats or the Republicans?
Look, both. I think the Democrats are much more far gone. Like I said, I think, and many of my colleagues in the Senate, they don't like what's happened to their party, particularly on these issues, but they're scared. They're scared of the radical left. You looked at Kathy Hochul and Hakeem Jeffries, who rushed to Manhattan to endorse Mondami. It's because they're scared of the extreme left. Look, Chuck Schumer and the shutdown, that was the same. AOC and Mondami is where all the energy is on the Democrat side, and they're scared of it. The Republican Party, we're not there yet, but I don't ever want to see us get there. And so I don't want to make the mistake that the Democrats did. I want to say, and listen, I don't think I'm going to persuade Tucker. I've known Tucker for 25 years. He's a smart guy. But I'm not going to persuade him. I'm not going to persuade Nick Fuentes either. But I am worried about young people. I am worried about teenagers and 20-somethings who listen to this poison that's being spread. And look, we're so divided. We're so polarized. Something you said earlier I agree with. We need to ratchet down the rhetoric. We need to stop attacking each other personally. And we're so polarized that I think particularly young people, they take a permission structure where they say, oh, this is what our team believes. Oh, okay, we hate Israel. Okay, we hate Jews. And anytime you see, look, we saw tragically when Charlie Kirk was murdered. And Charlie was a good friend of mine. I knew Charlie. I met Charlie when he was 18 years old and fresh out of high school. There were some loons online who said Israel killed Charlie Kirk. Now, that's nutty. But that kind of conspiracy theory is a really dangerous path to go down. And at least from my end, I'm going to do everything I can to stop the Republican Party from going that direction.
I know you have to go. I just want to say thank you because I've been trying to get you for a little while, and I finally got you, and you were kind enough to come in the studio. You're always welcome back on the show anytime, and I'm looking forward to having a lengthier conversation with you, and I'm definitely looking forward to having that conversation with you and Cory Booker.
Excellent.
Strictly about the whole NCAA. Thank you so much for taking time out of
appreciate
your
it, Stephen. Thank you.
I really, really appreciate it. The one and only Senator Ted Cruz right here with Stephen A. Straight Shooter with Stephen A. Back with your calls and more in a minute. "22 minutes past hour number 2 back here on Straight Shooter with yours truly, Stephen A. Coming at you every Wednesday night from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time over the airwaves of Sirius XM POTUS Radio. The number, as always, to call is 866-967-6887. That's 866-967-6887, 866-96 POTUS. But before I get to the calls, we've got folks here in our studio audience that have some questions that they'd like to ask. I am here. Let's go. How you doing?
Mr. Smith, thank you. My name is Alex Szymanski. My question is, what do you believe to be the most prominent long-term problem facing the United States and its future success as a nation?
Honestly speaking, I think at this particular moment in time, first of all, it always comes down to dollars and cents. It always comes down to the economy. I'm one of those people who firmly believes that if people are thriving financially, they have something to lose. And suddenly sensibility kicks in. When you take into account what you have to lose, that gives you cause to pause, and it enables you to refrain from some of your worst instincts, per se. And I think that's incredibly important to bring up. But I also think it's a division that presently exists within our nation that emanates from both sides of the aisle. The extreme, the fact that if you don't march lockstep with an ideology and what a party is promoting, then you're the Antichrist. You're the enemy. And when we live in the binary system that we live in, and it's an all or nothing mentality because there is no compromise, then that fuels chaos and mayhem. And the American citizens are left to suffer. And I think that's why it's so important that we preach. It's not about getting along in a literal perspective, like we all got to be friends and hug one another and sing kumbaya to one another. It's about our humanity kicking in and us recognizing that you may disagree with me and I may disagree with you, but that doesn't give me a license to hate on you or for you to hate on me. We can recognize a disagreement and say that we're not marching in lockstep with one another ideologically, but there are some things that I may make a valid point about. There are some things you may make a valid point about. And what we can agree to disagree about, we can do that. When Barack Obama was in office and he said it's okay to disagree without being disagreeable, it's amazing to me how many people ignored that part from both sides of the aisle when it comes to not hearing what they want to hear about your own ingrained personal beliefs. I was raised in the streets of New York City as a young black kid, Hollis, Queens, New York City, after being born in the Bronx. My family voted Democrat for the most part. My mother was a staunch Democrat. My father was a centrist who leaned right. My mother and father argued all the time. The 6 children that they had used it as an opportunity to embrace different perspectives and different points of views because we were hearing stuff from both sides and we felt edified to some degree. And as a result, we were able to make our own choices, as opposed to somebody saying, this is how you feel, this is how you will vote, this is what you're supposed to believe or else. And we live in an or else society these days where people will engage in demagoguery and demonization and will go about the business of belittling you at every turn. How can we possibly reach an accord if that continues, especially when it's emanating from our very politicians and elected officials who we put in office to work with one another to get things done, and they're not working with one another on a large scale most of the time? We have no hope unless that changes. Thank you for your question. Next question, sir. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Speak into the microphone so the audience can hear you.
My question for you is, what is something that you do agree with Democrats about?
Well, first of all, as somebody who primarily votes Democrat, the desolate and the disenfranchised are always a priority for me. When I think about the Affordable Care Act, while I'm mindful and cognizant of the fact that it's not nearly what it was supposed to be, that it's not as successful as the Democrats had once tried to portray, there is 24 million plus additional people who have health insurance. I like that. What I don't like is the fact that it's unsustainable, because what you told us it was going to cost isn't true. You told us if we want to keep our doctor, we can keep our doctor. That was false. You told us that it was going to cost less. That's not true. It costs more. You told us that the price tag was going to be approximately $950 billion when it's escalated above $1.5 trillion. And now you're looking for an additional $1.5 trillion just to keep it going when we already have a $37.8 trillion deficit. It's not sustainable. And so as a result, you do look at politicians. And again, I would have asked Ted Cruz. I had 1,000 more questions for him, but the senator had limited time because they got stuff going on on Capitol Hill now. So I was just happy that he kept his word and decided to come over here and give me the 30 minutes that he gave me. And I appreciated that. But if I had more time, I would have said, okay, what are we doing about that? Where's the Republicans' health care plan? Because even though we lament what the Democrats came up with Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, at least they did something. And so by doing something, now you've got to try to find a way to make it work. You can't go with their plan. You just can't. Right now, as you look at the Democratic Party with the continual resolution issue, it's shameful. Even though the Republicans are definitely not blameless in all of this, it was absolutely positively shameful that the CR was held up because you were trying to get the Affordable Care Act subsidies pushed into perpetuity. It was wrong. The fact of the matter is you have an obligation to come up with a plan to figure out a way that these exorbitant costs don't continue to escalate to such a degree that we completely eradicate the middle class. There are people in this audience here. These are middle class folks, okay? At least some of them. The fact is that when you look at the Affordable Care Act right now, I'm no expert, but you don't have to be an expert to look at the deficit that we're under, the cost of health care, the price that premiums have elevated to, deductibles have elevated to, the fact that insurance companies and big pharma are getting all of this money. How the hell are the American citizens suffering with the cost of health care, and people in a middle class and the upper middle class is eviscerating before our very eyes, and they're now going sinking to the lower middle class, if not lower? How is that happening while stock prices for big pharma and the insurance company have elevated over 500 to 1,100%? How's that happening? How are you making money? How was it deductibles, or how was a premium once $19, a month or whatever, a couple of years ago, and then it elevated to $40, and now it's elevated to approximately $90? How's that happening? And whose pocket is that going into? And if you're going to look at it, and then you're going to sit up there and look at the left because you're the one that came up with Obamacare, right? Which Ted Cruz and others on the right obviously adamantly opposed. I'm looking at you and I'm saying, how do you come up with this health care and you don't come up with a device or a mechanism in place to squash those loopholes so the insurance companies and big pharma aren't profiting as much as they are? The reality is you didn't do that. Why didn't you do that? You can't tell me you were stupid. You can't tell me you were ignorant or oblivious to it and you didn't know. The only thing that makes sense when you look at whether it's United Healthcare, Eli Lilly, or whomever it is, you look at big pharma and insurance companies and those who have donated to politicians and to the parties on both sides of the aisle. Well, how can I trust you to police them when they are putting money in your pockets and you're taking it every chance you get? Think about what we talked about. You started off the show talking about the Epstein files. You've got politicians that are going to be seen in those emails pursuing Epstein for campaign donations, for dollars. Think about that for a second. If you went and you were willing to take money from a dude who at the very least was arrested and indicted on sex trafficking and all of this other stuff and dealing with minors, and you're willing to take money from him, of course you ain't going to feel anything about taking money from insurance and big pharma. That means you bought and paid for. And if you bought and paid for it, the American citizens are the one being screwed. But you and I are sitting here talking, and me and somebody else will be in the street arguing or ready to fight or something like that. Why? Because of what they're doing. So because $500 million, $300 million, $750 million, $1 trillion ain't enough. I want to get more and more and more. Where the money coming from? It's coming from the American citizen, who then gets pissed off and wants to create hell and fury because their life is miserable because you didn't truly do anything to alleviate the problem. That's what we're talking about here. That's why you got me, a sports guy, doing a political show, because to me, it's not politics. To me, it's life. It's social commentary. It's me talking about life and what's affecting us as everyday American citizens. And it's the biggest incentive that I've had to ignore race. We got problems in this country. You're a black man, you're a black woman. It's racism, it's prejudice. Hispanics can say things like that as well or whatever. But when we talk about these kind of problems, I don't give a damn what color you are. I don't give a damn what your ethnicity is. We're all suffering together at the hands of those who have taken advantage of us and have abused us and have not taken care of business in a way that serves the best interest of the American people. I know this about me. I think about the American people. I don't think about myself. I think about us, meaning me and everybody else. That ain't these folks on Capitol Hill who are not doing their job to protect us. That's what I think about.
Thank you.
Next up, how are you?
Stephen A., how are you doing?
I'm all right. Thank you for
What
coming.
an opportunity to be here talking to you.
No problem.
Got to see you obviously talking to us before the show, and I can honestly attest that you're a very genuine person, and it was really awesome to be able to kind of see that. And so naturally, my name is Ashton Riyad. My question is, what are your thoughts on the next 20 years of the conservative movement, which seems seemingly lockstep with Trump? Versus the next 20 years of the progressive movement. As you can tell, there's a lot of discourse as to what direction one is headed, more Mamdani, more moderate. What are your thoughts?
I tell you, I'm more concerned about the extreme left than I am about Trump. Trump is 80. Trump ain't supposed to be able to circumvent the 22nd Amendment and run for a third term. So because that's the reality, at least at this particular moment in time, this fandom and this insatiable appetite is for him, not necessarily his policies. In a different, completely different kind of way. It was like a bunch of people who fawned over Barack Obama. But that didn't mean they loved his policies. If they loved his policies, governors, representatives, senators, federal judges, and people like that wouldn't have lost their seats. But a lot of folks lost their seats because they weren't necessarily enamored with his policies. They were enamored with him. The same could be said at the end of the day for Trump. We'll tolerate the tariff wars because when you get $37.8 trillion in debt, something's got to give. Try something. The crypto stuff and all that. We'll try something. You're going to make money and pad your own pocket by making deals, you and your sons and everybody else overseas. What we're American citizens are asking, we ain't worried about all of that. What you doing for us? And if you end up doing something for us, we'll eat it. You understand? As long as you're addressing those things. But you have an abundance of people on the right fawning over Trump, and you have folks who are elected officials on the right who know to do the same, because if you do otherwise, he may cost you your seat, and you're thinking about the long run. You're not thinking about short term. So if you ingratiate yourself with him and you're complimentary of him and you don't denigrate him or anything like that, he's good with you. And as a result, you might end up lasting when he's gone. J.D. Vance doesn't have that kind of cachet. Marco Rubio, who I believe is pretty legit, doesn't have that kind of cachet. Governor DeSantis, Florida. Some people in Florida think he's done a magnificent job. Others may not. But the bottom line is that he was a candidate. He's not Trump. Nikki Haley, not Trump. Vivek Ramaswamy, not Trump. All of these people are not him. But one could argue he's on his way out. So it's not really that much to be concerned about as long as we don't veer too far, okay? And then I think when you look at the latest with Marjorie Taylor Greene, let's give props where props is due. She did call Trump out about the Epstein files. She did call Trump about supposedly being America first, but you overseas making deals while stuff is going on here that you refuse to address. She flat out called him out, and she was unapologetic for it. I think that's a good sign, a breath of fresh air to see people on the right willing to stand up to him. I think it's important that you saw Republicans willing to sign, put their names on the dotted line and have those Epstein files open. I think those are incredibly, incredibly important things because you're reminding him and you're reminding the world there's no king in America. You're the president, but guess what? You're going to have to answer to us too. And I think that's refreshing because even for those who love Trump, nobody wants to see anything close to authoritarianism. I never bought into that anyway because I believe in this country. I believe in senators and congressional figures, and that people will rally together to do what's in the best interest of the country. So I never bought into that. But the point is, don't let him buy into it either. Don't let him even think about it being possible. So the fact that people compelled him to make decisions he otherwise gave indications that he didn't want to make, I think that's a plus. But here's the flip side. Mamdani is a renowned socialist, okay, who's 34 years old. He ain't going anywhere for a while. He was endorsed by AOC. He was endorsed by Bernie Sanders. Ultimately got endorsed by Hakeem Jeffries. So whether it's of their own volition or they were nudged significantly towards supporting him, and now you're going to be the mayor of the #1 city in America, you know, that becomes a bit of concern. That becomes a bit concerning because you're about socialism. You're about redistributing wealth. This man has spoken about confiscating property if necessary. You know, if people don't fall in line with what the law states. He hasn't talked about violating any laws or anything like that, but he has talked about maximizing the potential of any law on the books to enable him to do what some socialists might do. And when you look at it from that standpoint, in his youth and the fact that you have a younger generation that ain't vibing with capitalism, that's more about socialism, that's more about, you know, redistributing the wealth and being on an equal playing field and not maximizing your potential like you can in a capitalistic society. And they are vehemently against this stuff. I think that's a strong, strong reason to be incredibly concerned about the state of our country moving forward. So I would say to you, not because of the centrists, not because of the moderates, but because of the far progressive leftists out there, I think that's a reason to be far more concerned about the state of America than a lot of stuff on the right. Not everything, because I don't like what I'm seeing with ICE. I don't like what I'm seeing in terms of how people are being treated on the streets. I don't like the inching towards authoritarianism with the way we want to act as a government. How many executive orders can you sign? How many times can you sit up there and say, I mean, Trump was on the air the other day talking about who cares about what friction the police are going to face? So be it. Whoa, wait a minute. Like, you could feel a certain way, but to articulate that with the cameras and the microphone rolling and to basically say that you would endorse the police operating with relative impunity because that's how he came across is incredibly uncomfortable for me to hear. So I'm not letting the right off the hook by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm more concerned about the extreme leftists than I am about anything else right now.
Incredible answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Last question before I go to break and the phone calls. Go ahead, buddy.
Thanks for having me, Stephen A. My name is Zachary. Question is, how do you feel about term limits for the House, Senate, and the Supreme Court?
I don't care about term limits for the House because the House, you're voted every 2 years as a representative. So that means 15 to 18 months in, you campaign it, which means that I get an opportunity to change seats every 2 years. I'm not worried about that. I do think there should be term limits with senators, and I most certainly believe there should be term limits with the courts. I'm not into ageism and age discrimination. I'm getting older. I'm not younger. This ain't Mork and Mindy from the TV show that used to come on in the 80s where you got younger as time went on. This is real world. This is human beings. We get older, okay? Here's my thing. When you look at what's transpiring in this world right now, we're getting older and older and older. You cannot convince me. I don't care how bright they are. I don't care how smart they are. You can't convince me somebody in their 80s is reading one case after another and paying rapt attention to what the hell is going on. You can't convince me that they have an attachment to the modern day era where they're paying attention and they're mindful and cognizant of what's going on in the streets of America and they're adjusting accordingly. Okay? We've had a lot of things going on, in the 60s, it was civil rights, it was voting rights, it was the Fair Housing Act. You know what I'm saying? The 80s, the 90s, and beyond, we've seen some of the changes that took place. You have to take into account the times that we're living in, the people that are in our society, how evolution kicks in, how we evolve as a society. You have to take all of those things into consideration, along with the Constitution, okay? Because it's all subject to interpretation. And I do believe that if you're somebody that's in your 80s, you've got no business in that position. Make room for some new blood. There are educated individuals with law degrees that practiced law that ultimately became judges that ain't 80 years old, that ain't 70 years old. You can have somebody up in there in their 40s, in their 50s, in their 60s. You shouldn't be a lifetime appointee. It should be like 20-year terms. 20-year terms, and then it's time for somebody else new. I think that's a healthy way for our society to go. So I'm very big on term limits with the courts. I'm big enough on it with the Senate, obviously, but it doesn't matter to me with representatives because you're running for election every 2 years, and it's easy to bounce you up out of there if somebody needs to.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you. 866-967-6887 is the number to call up. That's 866-96-POTUS. You are listening live to Straight Shooter with Stephen A. right here over the airways of Sirius XM. POTUS Radio, channel 124. Back with calls in a minute to close out the show. Don't go away. Stephen A. live from D.C. Shooter with Stephen A. over the airways of Sirius XM, POTUS Radio, channel 124. 866-967-6887 is the number to call up. That's 866-96-POTUS. You're listening live to Stephen A. on Straight Shooter. Thanks again to Senator Ted Cruz. He had to get on out of here. I had a whole bunch more questions to ask him, but he only had 30 minutes, and he promised it, and he gave it, and I have to be thankful and grateful for that. He didn't have to do that, so I really, really appreciate him coming on in here. Let's go to the phones real quick before we get on out of here. Got about 10 minutes or so. Feel free to call in at 866-967-6887. That's 866-96-POTUS. Let's go to Nathan in Alabama. You're live with Stephen A. on Straight Shooter. What's up?
Wow. It is the greatest honor. In 12 years, you've been an inspiration to me and my kids.
Thank you.
You taught them a lot when you were on ESPN. I used to make them hush. They listen. And politics are the same way.
Okay.
20% of Republicans, 20% of Democrats make us all look like idiots. 20% of Alabama fans, 20% of Auburn fans make us all look like idiots. Why can't we all just realize the only way we win is to both sides to lose?
Well, it's not that simple, Nathan. I mean, I understand where you're coming from, and I respect it. And you're obviously speaking from a position of frustration, and you are completely justified in doing so because we all are affected by the politics existing in our nation. These people have the power to legislate our lives, whether it be healthcare, safety in the streets, affordability, borders, immigration, military. The list goes on and on. So I appreciate where you're coming from, but you have to understand that a lot of times the absence of realization comes from the tsunami of stuff that directly impacts your life. And you get caught up in that. You ever find yourself in a situation, Nathan, where you're so overcome by the stuff that rests on your shoulders, you're not really thinking about anything else because you're stuck in the rut of having to fend off the shrapnel of stuff that's thrown in your direction. And sometimes you're ill-equipped emotionally and mentally to do something about it at that particular moment in time because you're furious, you're frustrated, you're not thinking straight, all of these kind of things. And unfortunately, we live in a world where you have an abundance of vultures who capitalize off of that. Sometimes they're politicians. Sometimes it's people in corporate America. Sometimes it's other people. I remember I saw a video on social media of this elder white individual that went ballistic. And the inclination would have been for somebody to say, what are you doing acting like that? And then you found out this guy worked there at this place for over 25 years. And 3 days before he was set to retire, they fired him. 3 days. Now, I'm not advocating violence, but when something like that happens, I'll be damned if I don't understand. This man works for decades at a particular place, saving up his money, counting on his pension, counting on these kind of things. And if they did it 3 days before he was to retire, there had to be some loophole in the mix that enabled them to save a buck by getting rid of him before his retirement day arrived 3 days later. Now, how that man supposed to feel? So, again, we have to take that into consideration. I'm not advocating violence. But when I saw him lose it, I was like, yeah, I understand. I remember when this UFC fighter, for example, on a totally different level, Nathan, he got arrested and was thrown in jail, and they wouldn't let him out of jail, whatever. And I hated this. And I swear to you, had the subject come up on ESPN, I would have gone on national television and apologized for the story even being broached. It was saying that the guy was charged with murder. Well, damn, that sounds like a criminal, doesn't it? And then you found out some dude, the person that he was charged with attempted murder for, allegedly raped his 6-year-old daughter. Now, I don't have to ask this question, but I don't know a man alive who is a loving father who would not have been accused of attempted murder in that situation. I don't know him. White, black, Hispanic, I don't know. Asian, Native American, Hispanic, Jew, Catholic, Christian. I don't know of a man that could happen to his 6-year-old daughter that would not have been accused of attempted murder towards the person alleged to have committed that crime. So again, it calls for us to put things in its proper perspective. This is why context is so important in everything that we discuss, think, and do, because it's not as simple as it looks all the time. And we have to remember that. You got me, Nathan?
I do want to say one more thing. I blame Trump for the 2020 election because he was not presidential. That's what cost him the election.
Okay, I got you. And that's plausible, but for a man that isn't presidential, he got 77 million votes. And you have to respect the fact that there are tens of millions of Americans that ain't getting caught up in all of that. They're getting caught up in paying their bills, their health care, safety in the streets, making sure that they can provide for their families. That's their priority, which is why I have no patience for people that'll sit up there and just excoriate others and separate themselves from their friends. Everybody's got their own agenda. If you've got bills to pay, if you've got a family to take care of, you're thinking about that, not some of these other things. And everybody's not thinking about what you think they're thinking about when it comes to who they decide to vote for. And we have to take that into consideration. I appreciate the call, though. Thank you so much. Sean in Buffalo, you're live with Stephen A. How you doing, Sean?
Hey, Stephen A. I'm a big fan. I've been watching you since I was a kid. I'm a Division I cross-country athlete. And one thing I like about you and John Fetterman is that you are both unapologetically yourself. I thought the scandal the media made with you and your phone in the NBA playoffs last year was blasphemous.
It's all right.
So I must ask, does Fetterman's unapologetic style help him save his Senate seat by breaking from his party on the recent shutdown, or will his base turn on him?
His base may turn on him if you're talking about contemporaries, but the people will decide whether or not he remains in the Senate, the people of Pennsylvania. And I suspect that they will be supportive of him because he made sure that they'd be receiving a check during Thanksgiving and Christmas. And I think ultimately that will be what usurps anything else. That's my personal opinion. I appreciate the call, Sean. Thank you so much. David in Nashville, Tennessee, you're live with Stephen A. Good afternoon. Good evening, rather, David. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing well, Stephen A. How are you, man?
I'm all right. Can't complain.
Good. Well, hey, First, I'll say the same thing that everybody else has said. You know, big fan for a lot of years, but I'm calling in to critique a bit. You know, you're on ESPN, and maybe you're just used to dealing with people who either back off a bad opinion or stand up strong for the ones they got. Because this political commentary, you know, let's say 2 weeks ago you have Mandami on. Today you get around to talking about his socialist policies. You let Ted Cruz
Stop right there for a second. Mamdani, I interviewed Cuomo for 45 minutes. Mamdani called in with 7 minutes left in the show. So, I mean, whatever you're going to say it. But that wasn't a real interview. It's just that Mamdani called in with 7 minutes left. The election was 4 days later. I didn't know what he was calling in, what he was going to say. I know he wanted to respond to Cuomo. And I let him speak because we had about 6 minutes really left. That's what happened with the Mamdani interview. So whatever you're going to say, bring up anything else but that interview, because that interview wasn't really an interview. It's just that he called in at the last minute, surprisingly so, because we had no idea he was going to call in. Go ahead.
All right, super fair. Understand that. Tonight, I'm listening to Ted Cruz. You ask a very, very direct, very straight shooter type question about how ICE is going around this country and their tactics. And then what did he answer? Do you remember what he answered, Stephen A.?
Yes, but I don't have time to get into that with you with 4 minutes left in the show. But I remember.
Well, what he answered was the border needs fixed. Biden ruined the border. That didn't answer your question. I have a feeling in a couple weeks from now, you're going to have a segment about how bad ICE's tactics are when you had Ted Cruz on for a half hour straight.
Okay, but my point to you is this. Ted Cruz feels the way that he feels. If he wants to evade the answer, I've got plenty of time to give commentary. So do you, because you heard the answer to his question. And on top of it all, as a member of the GOP who completely supports Trump's position in terms of ICE and how it's treating folks who cross the borders and what have you, and how it's parading throughout the streets of America, obviously he feels the way that he feels. At some point in time, it's not about pushing back. It's about letting them speak, having their quotes on the record so we know exactly where they stand and the American citizens can make a decision based on their answers about how to feel about them and whether or not to support them. You can't sit up there and get in somebody's face like a senator. You're wrong. To hell with you. Blah, 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 blah. Really? That's going to accomplish something? It's not going to change his position. The American people are going to change his position by making sure they say, okay, take your ass home, sit at home, don't be a senator anymore, or stay on board. See, we keep thinking, pushing back, gotcha. Ted Cruz is unapologetic about his positions. They are very consistent. We may not like it, but he doesn't care. He feels the way that he feels. We could say, okay, and then you go to the polls and you pull the lever for somebody else. That's how that works. That's the way it goes. Next caller.
Irvin West from Hammond, Louisiana.
Yes, sir. How are you? Go ahead.
Okay, a couple of points. The big, beautiful bill that the senator was crowing about, he better give more than $1,000 to each newborn. According to the Office of Budget and Management, this big, beautiful bill is going to cost us $3.5 trillion into the national debt, and it was a big takeaway for the 1% and the 10%. But that debt's going to be riding on the back of these kids coming into the world because they're the ones that are going to pay the interest on it.
I agree.
Secondly, the Democrats are afraid of AOC and Madami. I'm going to tell you what, the Republicans have been afraid of Trump until finally a woman –
Well, they've been afraid of him because he'll get them out of office. He speaks out against them, their constituency. He targets them. Then they won't have a job. We got to take into consideration that most of the folks on the right who may not like Trump, his style, his rhetoric, the way he comports himself, whatever, are biding their time because their attitude is he's going in 3 years. They're trying to outlast him where they don't have to deal with him. Remember, when he left in 2021, they didn't want to have to deal with him. They were fine with him being gone. The problem is his cachet didn't dissipate amongst conservatives and Republicans throughout this country. And unfortunately, they were going to have to deal with him. DeSantis couldn't hold on. Nikki Haley couldn't go on. Ramaswamy couldn't hold on. None of them could. That's what happened. So if the man is flexing and you know he's petty enough to target you and get you up out of there because you don't agree with him, they're saying, let's last until after 2028 when this man goes away. And then after that, we can get back to the business of being who we want to be. But for right now, we've got to capitulate to some degree. Go along to get along, to survive and ultimately prosper down the road. That's how it goes. That's it for this edition of the Stephen A. Smith Show. Straight Shooter with Stephen A. Hope y'all enjoyed the show. I know I did. Had a blast. Until next time, everybody. Talk to y'all next Wednesday. Hello.